Not once in his lifelong career with the civil service did Jim Garwood ever think he'd know how to do this. Mix forensic chemicals, chemicals used to detect traces of blood. It's a scene out of a modern TV crime drama. But it's all too real for Jim Garwood. The blood he's looking for is his mother's, traces of it still on the basement floor, the room where police say she died accidentally. And when the lights go out, the luminescent glow of what is likely blood.
My mother's death was no accident.
What was it?
It was a homicide.
Jessie Garwood was 87 when she died. She lived on her own in this house on a quiet street in East Winnipeg. Her son says she wasn't in the best of health and was slowly going blind. She took certain precautions, such as going downstairs backwards to avoid falling. But she lived alone, she adapted to her world, and she was proud of her independence.
I would plant most of the vegetables, but she would tend to the roses and the flowers in the front, and that was a big thing. To me, she was a wonderful person. She's somebody that helped me in many ways. Well, certainly helped me grow up, as any mother would, but I just get stuck with it in the sense that she died so unexpectedly.
A little over 8 years ago, Jim and his then-wife Karen took a trip, but it was cut short when he got news nobody wants to hear. His mother had died.
I'd just seen her, and everything was fine, and everything was expected to be fine for the next few days when I was away.
In his notes, the first officer on the scene described his version of the events. It appeared that the deceased had either fallen down the stairs or tripped on the throw rug at the bottom of the stairs. Her head was resting on the corner of the concrete base of the telepost. It looks like she'd hit her head on the base. The police and medical examiner decided this was an accidental death, and at the time, Jim saw no reason to doubt them. 3 years later, though, Jim Garwood began to realize that there was more to this story. He'd moved into his mother's house, but looking at the stairs, something just didn't make sense. Court documents filed by Garwood show that's when he got a copy of the medical examiner's report. But from what he could see, the information didn't add up. 4 broken ribs, her arm was broken in 2 places, and what really stood out were the 13 distinct injuries to her head.
And when I looked down the basement stairs, there's only 8 stairs. I then came to the conclusion that this was not possible.
The medical examiner agreed to a meeting with Jim, and in a very unusual move, the medical examiner noted the suspicious circumstances that Jim raised, and as a result, changed the cause of Jessie's death from accidental to undetermined. Now Jim had one answer: his mother's death might not be an accident, at least according to the ME. But suddenly he also had many more questions.
Why are these things happening in the basement? Why is there no blood stains on the stairs if she had fallen repeatedly? All sorts of questions that had to be answered.
These are the actual police photographs taken at the scene. Winnipeg police initially refused to turn them over. Garwood was forced to take them to court. It took several years, but a judge finally forced police to turn over the evidence. To this day, Jim still can't bring himself to look at the photos of his mother's lifeless body.
I'm not sure that those images would disappear in the back of my mind and I'd just forget them. They would be registered rather permanently, I think.
Instead, he says, he showed them to people who know exactly what to look for. With a piece of chalk, Joe Slemko returns Jessie Garwood to the place she died, drawing an outline of her body as it was found. He's an expert in analyzing blood spatter and a member of the Edmonton Police Service.
We know that it's traveling.
A simple drop of blood can reveal so much.
As that droplet hits, collapses and forms this little teardrop, we know that that had to be traveling in that direction, but it tells us that it had to originate from somewhere over here.
That's exactly what Slemko saw in the police photos of Jessie Garwood. Remember, Winnipeg police say Jessie Garwood died by striking her head against the base of this post. Among the court documents filed by Garwood is a report written by Joe Slemko, which shows that's not the case.
We've got all of this blood spatter that's originating out over here, and this is all traveling in a directionality like this. So we can bring those all back to a location approximately right in here. So scientifically, it all originates from an area in here, not from anywhere on the telepost.
My first thought was, there must be a mistake here.
Glenn Woods is a former RCMP superintendent, the former director of the Behavioral Sciences Branch, an expert in crime analysis. His report is also part of Garwood's court case, and while he's looking at the Winnipeg Police's own photos, he disagrees with their findings. In this photo in particular, he sees a familiar story.
The type of bruising I saw, I see very often in elderly people. Their blood vessels break quite easily if there's any kind of violent or aggressive act.
Like someone trying to restrain Jessie Garwood by holding her arms, says Woods.
Well, we've got
Slemko sees that too.
just a myriad.
The blood pattern suggests to him another person may have been involved in this tragedy.
And it's of note that this is where the victim was found, with her feet in this particular location and her head over here. So we've got this wiping motion in possibly a movement consistent with the movement of the victim across the floor.
But if it was something other than an accident, what was it? The basement where Jessie Garwood died is still Jim's workshop. He's careful, precise, and meticulous about keeping things in order. A place for everything and everything in its place, including heavy wooden sticks which he keeps in these buckets. Just like the wooden sticks police found bloodied and lying under Jessie Garwood's body.
Unless something was brought to the scene and taken from the scene, those, to me, were a good possibility in terms of being used as a weapon.
Which is exactly what Slemko sees in the blood spatter.
And based on the type of injuries that the victim had, it's not consistent with a blunt force striking the concrete here.
What's it consistent with?
It's the blood spatter and the injuries are consistent with some type of object striking the victim's head at an area up here, causing the injuries that were observed.
Glenn Woods looks at the entire picture. In particular, what happened the night before Jessie Garwood was found dead. She wore an alarm, something she'd press if she was in distress, and that alarm went off that evening. An emergency operator called the house, but Jessie didn't answer. Someone else in the house did.
She fell?
Yes.
Is she hurt?
No, she just slipped. It's okay.
You don't need any help.
Nope, I'm good.
This alarm call doesn't make sense to Glenn Woods.
And why would she push an alarm if there was someone in the house, someone else in the house to assist her?
Like many people who wear these alarms, Jessie had the odd accidental alarm. As Woods points out, she wore it all the time. And in the moment when she would have needed it the most, when, according to Winnipeg police, she was lying on the floor of her basement bleeding to death, that alarm was nowhere to be found. This is the photo taken by Winnipeg police. Jessie's alarm isn't on her neck, but lying on the dresser beside her bed. What it adds up to, says Woods, is likely something far more sinister than an accident.
I think it should be reinvestigated from start to finish as a homicide versus an accidental death.
Joe Slemko agrees.
It's disappointing. It's very disappointing as a police officer. But I've seen this before, where they reach an opinion and they're going to stick to that opinion no matter what.
So now, 3 trained professionals say this may not have been an accident. The blood spatter expert and the forensic expert say it should be investigated as a murder, but the Winnipeg police won't budge from their accident theory.
Well, I feel rather frustrated, to say the least.
That may be, but Jim won't give up. The documents he's filed are an application to file a wrongful death suit, because in his mind, if it was a homicide, someone out there knows what happened. Remember that alarm call made the night before Jessie's body was found?
How may I help you? Miss Garwood?
She's fine. She fell. I'm her granddaughter.
You are her granddaughter.
Yeah, Kathy Watson. It's fine.
Kathy Watson was Jessie's step-granddaughter. She was also the last person to see Jessie alive, telling police she took Jessie to a movie the night before her body was found. To Jim, though, going to a movie would have been unusual.
Unusual in the sense that Kathy had never done that before. taken her to a movie. But secondly, my mother was not able to see the movie. She had macular degeneration of the eyes.
There would be another call the next morning to 911 when Kathy Watson found Jessie Garwood's body. Jim's suspicions would grow stronger and this case more bizarre. He says an ongoing problem in the family had been Kathy's suspected gambling habit. It had gotten so bad that at one point Jim co-signed a loan to help get her out of debt. And in the 5 months before his mother died, 4 checks were written on Jessie Garwood's account for a total of $14,000 to the name of Kathy Watson.
The only question then would be, did she sign them?
For that answer, Jim sent the checks to a handwriting expert, who concluded that Jessie Garwood was probably not the person who signed the checks. The problem is, as you can see, the signatures are too similar. The last name is written higher than the first name 3 times over.
Either they've been traced from a common source, or one has been traced from the other.
Even Winnipeg police had their doubts about the checks. Investigators thought they were suspicious and had reasonable grounds to believe they were forgeries. Jessie and Kathy had fought over money before, but because Jessie Garwood was dead, there was no complainant, so police stopped the investigation into the checks. The last of the 4 suspicious checks was written 2 days before Jessie's body was found. But according to court documents, high-ranking members of the Winnipeg police questioned their own accidental death theory. In a sworn affidavit to prevent Jim Garwood from obtaining certain police documents, the head of the major crimes and homicide units says he believes the death of Jessie Garwood is undetermined, and that it may or may not have been the result of foul play. Last November, Winnipeg police did ask for an independent review of the evidence. For that, they turned to the Saskatoon Police Service. That review discounted Joe Slemko's blood spatter analysis largely because of the terminology he used in his report and because of how the body was found. The review says first responders moved Jessie's body, that she wasn't laying on her back when they found her, but in fact was on her side, and they rolled her onto her back. That's what the first police officer who arrived says he was told by the fire captain. So, according to the review, any alleged assault would have been in a different location from where Slemko says it happened, and therefore, his conclusions are inaccurate. The Saskatoon review found no reason to disagree with Winnipeg police. But buried in the binders Jim Garwood keeps in his kitchen are the original paramedic and fire department reports, and both clearly state Jessie Garwood was found supine, or on her back, the way she's seen in the police photos, and in exactly the position referenced in Slemko's analysis. Despite all the information to the contrary, the Winnipeg police still maintain that the death of Jessie Garwood here in her own home was an accident. On several occasions, they've refused to reinvestigate, and even if they did, it would be difficult because a lot of evidence has gone missing. There's no recording of the original Victoria Lifeline call. There's no record of the original 911 call. And remember those bloody sticks we've seen in the police photographs? They're nowhere to be found. Even if this potential evidence could be found, the death of Jessie Garwood might still be an accident. Kathy Watson would not agree to an interview. Her lawyer says this case is a real whodunit, but says his client is not the one to blame.
My client has absolutely no compunction in saying that she was probably the last person to see Mrs. Garwood alive, but she had absolutely nothing to do with her death.
He agrees there had been previous tension over money, but says his client rejects the notion that these checks were forged.
This was money that was provided to her by Mrs. Garwood. It was done without the intimidation or cajoling of Mrs. Garwood, and as you know, they had a very close relationship.
When we asked the Winnipeg police for comment by email, they also refused, maintaining there was no sign of foul play and no evidence to warrant further investigation.
I would like to see them do something. I mean, it's their responsibility, not my responsibility to be doing a criminal investigation. It's theirs, and they're not doing it. They didn't do it on day one, they didn't do it in 2007, and they haven't done it since.
It's impossible to say exactly what happened in this house that evening. Jim Garwood says he'll never feel completely at peace until he knows for sure how his mother died. And until police agree to reopen the investigation, he'll keep pushing, squandering his own retirement
waiting for someone to give him the answers he needs.